Hello. In the 1980s, the leading historian Ian Kershaw published a book called The Hitler Myth, which was a groundbreaking book in many ways. Kershaw, relatively unknown at the time, launched his reputation, and he's now sort of widely regarded as the leading historian in the English-speaking world of Nazi Germany, perhaps alongside Richard Evans. This is certainly one of my own favourite books, and what I aim to do with this video is to take you through the key points in one of the key chapters in that book, which is the chapter about the Night of the Long Knives and the issue with the little Hitlers, the party functionaries at the grassroots level. So this is the first of two videos. I'll refer you to the second video at the end of this one. And this first video looks at the issue of the Night of the Long Knives, in particular the significance, the outcome of the Night of the Long Knives. Just a brief bit of context about Kershaw. Kershaw, in his early career, was commissioned by the leading German historian Martin Brosat. Martin Brosat was a structuralist historian, and Kershaw was commissioned to do research into popular opinion as to how ordinary people viewed the Nazi regime, and in particular he focused on the people of Bavaria, in particular Upper Bavaria. So he did a lot of research in that particular locality. This book, The Hitler Myth, was published originally in 1980 in German, and then I think it was published in 1987 in English. Okay, so as with my other videos, you're looking at my notes. You don't have to sort of play the commentary. You can use it as you want. I would suggest that as we move from one page to the next, that you pause and read the notes, and then perhaps listen to my commentary, where I'll take you through the key points and add a little bit of contextual information to help you understand it. There are, I think, 6 blocks of information in this video. So the first section is just to give you the context. As I say, the purpose of the chapter was not to really look at the origins and causes of the Night of the Long Knives. It was more to look at the immediate outcome in terms of popular opinion. Of course, the causes are well known. You're looking at Ernst Roehm there. Ernst Roehm, one of Hitler's loyalist and longest-standing colleagues, the leader of the Nazi private army, the stormtroopers, which was used by Hitler in the early years of Hitler's rule in 1933 to great effect as part of the Gleichschaltung, the process of coordination. The stormtroopers were used to effectively crush and remove the influence of the political left wing in Germany. And then, of course, Hitler very famously declared that he wanted to call a halt to the revolution. The revolution could not be a permanent state of affairs, which disappointed Rome. Perhaps that is an understatement. Rome, of course, wanted to continue the revolution, continue the Nazi takeover, and remove all what he perceived as enemies of the Nazi regime. And in particular, he wanted to remove the influence of the political right, of the conservative elites, and in particular the leadership of the German army. So he wanted a second revolution to remove the influence of the conservative elites. And of course, Hitler needed the conservative elites, certainly in the short term, in the first few years. And so after a lot of soul-searching and some persuasion by others, Hitler made the decision in June 1933, to remove the SA leadership violently in a night of murder called the Night of the Long Knives. Anyway, that's the sort of background in a few sentences. Let's get straight into Kershaw's points. Okay, so the context. What Kershaw does then is he talks about he starts off by talking about the unpopularity of the Nazi Party and the SA in June 1934. And he points out, in terms of the context, the Night of the Long Knives occurred at a time when the Nazi regime was losing popularity. There was, for many, many Germans, there was a huge gulf between the election promises that the Nazi Party had made in the rise to power before 1933, and really the reality of daily life. There's 17 months later, in June 1934, many Germans were sort of disappointed. They had been promised many things by the Nazis in the rise to power, but Germans were disappointed. Incidentally, throughout this, you'll see lots and lots of little quotes, some of them by Kershaw directly, others where Kershaw is quoting from original reports. All the quotes are in italics. As a student of the subject, I would strongly suggest that you make a note of some of them, select some, and learn them by heart. They certainly will strengthen your writing when you write essays. Kershaw in particular is a very strong academic writer. He has a very, very good way with words. He can sum up very neatly a point in through forceful, persuasive writing, and it's worthwhile learning a few of his quotes. So, in particular, the Nazi Party activists at the grassroots level were anything but a force for unity, harmony and integration. So, of course, during the election campaign, party activists at the grassroots level, they're the sort of the local Nazis, hundreds of thousands of them. In fact, with the SA, we're talking about moving into millions. That so many people jumped on the Nazi bandwagon and joined the party and joined the SA after Hitler became Chancellor in January 1933. And of course, the promises while the party were a party of opposition was to create unity, harmony, and integration. But now, a year and a half later, many people were saying, well, hold it, you haven't really changed anything. You are just as bad as the people who were there before Hitler became Chancellor. So examples of that, the SA were attacking priests, and that upset many ordinary Germans. A second example, Kershaw mentions local power struggles, lots of petty empire building, and corruption. Most of all, many Germans were alarmed at the sort of rowdy disturbances and the sort of bullying, the sort of the way in which the SA were elbowing themselves into power. They had done their good work removing the political left and anti-social elements, and of course many of the German people, in particular the middle classes, had approved of that, but now, a year and a half later, they were upset by the ongoing behaviour of SA thugs. So that context is important, because under any normal circumstances, when the head of government orders the mass shooting of former comrades without trial, there would have been a popular outrage against the head of government. But the story that Kershaw goes on to tell is in fact the reverse. It increased Hitler's popularity. So, moving on. The immediate popular reaction then, so we're now talking about in July 1934. The Night of the Long Knives, of course, happened on the 30th of June, the last day of June 1934. Kershaw points out that from his studies in Bavaria, there was almost total absence of any criticism of Hitler. And he gives various examples. So a report from Swabia said, sympathy lay generally from the beginning on the side of the Fuhrer. Reports in Upper Bavaria said, unreserved recognition for the energy, cleverness and courage of the Fuhrer, which could be heard everywhere. A third example, 41 labour exchanges in Bavaria. Labour exchanges are where the unemployed go to receive their benefits. So a very useful resource, reports of what people were saying in the labour exchanges. It would have covered the mood of all sectors of the population, but in particular the working classes. Shows an overwhelming admiration for Hitler and approval of his actions, with general condemnation of Ernst Roehm, the leader of the SA. That's significant because, of course, the working classes, the unemployed, were largely drawn from the working classes. And the working classes, if there's one sector of the population that had never really been won over to the Nazis, certainly prior to 1933, their vote mainly went to the SPD or to the communists. And yet, here you've got working class Germans speaking very positively about what Hitler did when he ordered the murder of his own leaders on the night of the Long Knives. One report commented that Hitler's forceful action had won him enormous support from among those who had formerly been hesitant in their attitudes towards Nazism. As I said, in particular, the working classes. And so the SPD, which of course were the party that had previously won the support of the working classes and that had been subject to attack in the first half of 1933, of course most of them had gone into exile or were incarcerated in concentration camps by 1934, but those who had gone into exile based themselves in Prague, and they gathered reports from informants inside Germany, which are very, very useful for historians. The reason they wrote these reports was to genuinely assess the prospects of them returning at some point to Germany and campaigning again. The organisation in exile, the SPD in exile, was called SOPAID, and they produced a very gloomy report that large sections of the working classes, who had, of course, had previously supported the SPD, had been won over to Hitler as a result of the Night of the Long Knives. So all of these reports also show widespread ignorance of most Germans about what really happened. There were lots and lots of wild rumours flying around in July 1934, most of which were completely untrue. So there were rumours that there had been an attempt on Hitler's life, not true. There were rumours that von Papen had been shot, the previous chancellor, not true. General von Schleicher, the previous chancellor, had been shot, but certainly not von Papen. Von Papen happened to be out of the country at the time, very conveniently for him. Perhaps if he had been in the country, he would have fallen victim. Okay, so then the third section. Kershaw then takes a look at Hitler's speech to the Reichstag. There's a photograph there, 14th of July 1934, 2 weeks after. Hitler felt it necessary to comment about the Reichstag. Of course, whenever he spoke to the Reichstag, when the Reichstag now had been fully coordinated, there was only one political party in there, the Nazi party. It no longer has a function in lawmaking. Hitler simply used it as a forum for giving speeches that were reported on the radio and broadcast through loudspeakers in public places and into German people's homes and reported in the newspapers. So an important speech, a long speech, Not Hitler's greatest speech, but nevertheless a very effective speech that he made about, this is Hitler's view about the reasons why he murdered the leaders of the SA. Okay, so what did he say? The reason he did it is he wanted to quash those rumours. Okay, he was aware of the fact that there were popular anxieties flying around Germany. Kershaw says it was a remarkable speech in that the head of the German government openly accepted full responsibility for action amounting to mass murder. So in this speech, Hitler described himself firstly as the supreme judge, as a quote, of the German people, who had been compelled to act decisively in an emergency to deal with the mutinous behaviour of the SA leaders. So that sort of concept, it was the first time that had been spoken of, that Hitler was the supreme judge. In a sense that he was the voice of the people, and he was talking about a form of natural justice, that he was the embodiment of the will of the people. And where the law was inadequate, it allowed Hitler the right, as the voice of the people, to step in and take action, as he did on this occasion. The second thing is Hitler justified his actions in terms of morality, put great emphasis on the immoral lifestyle of the SA leaders, and in particular their homosexuality. It was well known that the SA leaders, including Roehm himself, were homosexuals, and appealing to sort of conventional bourgeois middle-class German values. Hitler placed a great deal of emphasis on the fact that he was dealing with their immoral lifestyle. He also emphasised that his intervention was justified because by murdering the SA leadership, Hitler was restoring internal law and order. So he was spilling blood to prevent a much greater spilling of blood. In his speech, Hitler reiterated the point that he had made to the party leaders a year earlier, that revolution must not become a permanent state of affairs. So back in the summer of 1933, Hitler very famously had spoken to the Gauleiters, the leading party faithful, saying that revolution must be channeled into the stream of evolution, one of Hitler's most famous speeches. And he reiterated that point in this speech of the 14th of July 1934. So it's significant overall, that speech to the Reichstag, because it strengthened popular confidence in Hitler. As we say, it was listened to, it was played on loudspeakers in public places, it was reported widely. And the next day, observants said that initial confusion, the rumours that were flying around Germany, started to disperse. There was now a feeling of that feeling of legal insecurity had now turned to admiration and gratitude, and that through this brutal energy, Hitler had prevented a much greater bloodbath. So the speech was very, very well received, which, as Kershaw pointed out, is remarkable in the sense that you would anticipate if the leader of a modern state ordered mass murder without trial, that there would have been outrage. But in fact, what the speech did is it boosted Hitler's popularity. Okay, so the next section. Hitler's increased popularity crossed all social divides. So Kershaw looks at how widespread this popularity was, and he points out the following. The working classes and the unemployed, we've already mentioned that. Okay, they had previously not been won over to the Nazis, but they were especially susceptible to this new mood of acclaim. Kershaw quotes a report from the German city of Ingolstadt, quote, an especially strong increase and consolidation of trust in the Fuhrer among the unemployed, workers clamouring to buy pictures of Hitler. Even more in the countryside. Many of Bavaria's rural districts, which had not previously been Nazi strongholds, commented on the great satisfaction at what had taken place and the high esteem for the Fuhrer. And approval was also strong in Catholic districts of Germany, in spite of the fact that Nazi support was traditionally from Protestant regions. And of course, there's a photograph on the right there. Back in 1933, in the summer of 1933, the Nazi regime, their first international agreement was with the Vatican, called the Concordat, in which the Nazis had promised to stay out of religious affairs, and in return the Pope promised that German priests would not comment on political matters from the pulpit. And of course, that was a promise that Hitler failed to keep, although the Catholic Church did keep, on the whole, to their promise. And certainly in terms of the Night of the Long Knives, as Kershaw points out, the leadership of both the Protestant and the Catholic churches refrained from any public criticism of the events of the Night of the Long Knives. Kershaw then drills down in more detail into this sort of notion of Hitler being the voice of the ordinary German and speaking for the sentiments of the people, and the ordinary, common, simple man taking ruthless action in the interest of restoring order, particularly for the middle classes. So there were two key features of Hitler's renewed popularity, Kershaw points out. The first feature was that Hitler was the executant of natural justice. Natural justice being a higher order of justice, that sometimes the written law is insufficient, and as the embodiment of the will of the people, he was the typical German, defending the little man against the abuse of power of the big shots. Okay, the big shots being abusive, high-level, high-ranking SA leaders who were trying to elbow into power for their own selfish reasons. The second feature, that Hitler was the upholder of public morality, cleansing public life of the immoral and the corrupt SA leaders. So a report in Berlin said that Hitler had paved the way for a moral renewal. So Kershaw sort of pulls this together and says that Hitler was very much projected as being the man of the people. Quote from Kershaw, taking a courageous stance against the jumped-up, petty and debauched despots in the Nazi movement. Hitler as the representative of the common man. So Hitler's morality, not that of the law courts, but his morality is of the healthy sentiments of the people. Above all, Hitler's actions appeased middle-class anxieties, that SA unruly behaviour, their arbitrary violence, that had been initially tolerated and welcomed because it was directed against the political left, but now that it was continuing and ongoing and was being directed against the middle classes, it threatened peace and quiet, it threatened law and order. So Hitler's decisive actions gave legitimation to state murders. They legalised state murders. So the popular perception was that through murder, Hitler had restored law and order. An example there, quoting a small businessman in Saxony, said, Hitler was an absolutely honest person who wants the best for the German people. And Kershaw sums it up nicely there with a quote, ruthlessness in the interest of bourgeois order was clearly a central component of Hitler's popularity. Okay, so the next section, hopes for a purge of unpopular Nazi party officials. So the Night of the Long Knives was obviously a purge against the Nazi private army, the stormtroopers. Separate from the SA was, of course, the Nazi party itself, that was also equally unpopular. Now, Kershaw goes into the next section of this chapter. He looks at the nature of the unpopularity of the Nazi party, and that's a section called The Little Hitlers, and that's my next video. So play my next video for the notes on that. So this conclusion to this section about the Night of the Long Knives is really a linking section to where Kershaw goes to in the second half of his chapter. So what does Kershaw say? He says that even before the Rome Putsch, many Germans felt that the Nazi party leadership had lost touch with the people. Okay, and that's the emphasis on the Nazi party, not Hitler, but the Nazi party. And that the Night of the Long Knives, because Hitler took action against the SA leadership, it opened the door for many ordinary Germans then to criticise the party leadership. And so many ordinary Germans now hoped that because the SA leadership had been purged of unpopular elements by Hitler, that this would mark the beginning of a further set of purges in which Hitler would remove unpopular party and Labour Front functionaries, in particular party officials at the local levels, which we'll look at in the next video. So party officials were especially unpopular because of their very, very ostentatious display of wealth and power. That in the course of 1933, many party officials had sort of muscled their way in to local jobs in local government, etc. And that had not been well received by many sections of the population. And also there was a contrast between the promises of the party, sorting out the economy, etc. And by the summer of 1934, the economy was still struggling. And many ordinary Germans still struggling to make ends meet, and yet local Nazi party officials had sort of grabbed power for themselves and were living a life of very blatant, visible wealth. And that contradicted Hitler's own lifestyle. Hitler lived a very simple lifestyle, shirked sort of material comfort, certainly in terms of how he was presented in newsreels and so on, and in Goebbels' propaganda machine. So Goering, for example, Hermann Goering, wrote to Hitler's deputy Fuhrer saying that there was a universal expectation that the purge of the SA would be followed through not only with more removals of SA, but beyond in all affiliations of the Nazi Party organisation. That was the expectation. And then the final section of this first half of the chapter, I've called it If Only the Fuhrer Knew. By the summer of 1934, many Germans genuinely believed that many matters were being deliberately kept from Hitler. by corrupt party members. And the phrase, if only Hitler knew, if only he knew, was frequently on the lips of ordinary Germans. And of course, the events of the Night of the Long Knives appear to confirm that view, because, after all, Hitler had not known about the SA leaders, and then he had learned of the behaviour of the SA leaders, and once he had learned of it, Hitler had acted ruthlessly to eradicate the SA leaders. So the Night of the Long Knives marked the beginning of the growth of a legend that when Hitler did not act, this was because his underlings, in other words, the party, members of the Nazi party, were sheltering him from the real evils. They were blocking information. They were not telling him what was happening. A quote from a Bavarian party member in December 1934. Hitler would be all right, but his underlings are nothing but swindlers. So Hitler's image, bolstered by his simple lifestyle, and there's a picture there to the right, Hitler's simple country lifestyle, dressed simply in the countryside with his dog, taking the dog for the walk. Hitler, of course, did not drink alcohol. He led a very, very simple lifestyle. Hitler's image, bolstered by that simple lifestyle, was therefore of a man without fault, in contrast to many members of the party who immorally took advantage of Hitler's rise to power to muscle in and to take reward for themselves. The phrase Fuhrer without sin, as one report of September 1934 described him, and of course which became the heading of the chapter in Kershaw's book. So to conclude, nice quote here from Kershaw. Following the Rome Putsch, at a point of real crisis for the regime, Hitler had been able to strengthen his own popular standing through playing on the healthy sentiments of the people and appealing to a conventionally crude sense of morality and order. The affair was a propaganda coup par excellence. That's the end of this video. Kershaw then moves in the second half of this chapter to look at the image of the local party bosses. So I have written up a set of notes on that, and I have recorded a similar walk and talk video in which I'll walk and talk you through my notes to that chapter. You'll find that video in the same playlist on my channel. I hope that was useful to you.